Welcome to the latest installment of the Sharp Best Ball Show. I am your host, Tod Burros, and today we're going to take a second look at the rookies with Ryan McCrystal of Sharp as well. And we are going to try and go through each one of the key rookies, review the camp news. That is one of the important things to do, especially with rookies, as we try to take down the $3 million grand prize. And speaking of Underdog Fantasy, this podcast is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time, Best Ball Mania 4, where the first prize is, as I just mentioned, $3 million. Don't know what Best Ball is? It's simple. You just enter Best Ball Mania on Underdog's slick mobile app, draft your team, and that's it. Yep, it's set it and forget it as Underdog optimizes your weekly lineup to create the highest scoring one. It's here, it's Best Ball Mania 4, and it's your shot at a first place prize of $3 million. They also have a lot of other great contests going off. I am up to about 400 Underdog drafts this year. If you want to get signed up, go to underdogfantasy.com or via the App Store and use the promo code SHARPKIT, and they'll not only double your first deposit up to $100, but you'll also receive the Sharp Football Draft Kit for just $1. That includes over 40 exclusive fantasy football articles, which will help your chances at winning the $3 million grand prize. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code SHARPKIT. All right, so let's bring in Ryan, have a discussion. Ryan, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always excited to talk rookies.
The top two running backs are Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan today, it was announced as third string, which shows you just about how much you can trust these early depth charts. Any thoughts on Bijan and Gibbs that have come out of the first week of camp? Anything that has changed your mind on either of them? Are you on them or off them at ADP?
I mean, like most rookies, I'm leaning towards off them, but obviously they both have very high ceilings. So I'm, certainly have exposure to both of them. I think I'm a little more confident in Robinson just because, it's even if very early in the season he's not necessarily he's sharing the load. Eventually, we certainly expect him to see a very high workload there. With Gibbs, I'm a little bit more nervous about him. Very similar to what I said when we talked right after the draft. I'm just not so sure that he's the best fit for the Lions' run game specifically. Obviously, he has a huge ceiling because of the passing game production, but I don't know that he's going to see a ton of run game. And because we're expecting the Lions to take another step forward this year, if they're good, if they emerge as one of the best teams in the NFC, that could limit his role. He's, obviously, like I said, you still want exposure because any of these guys that are catching passes are going to have a huge ceiling. But to throw some stats behind this, really the thing that jumps out to me, the thing that scares me is last year, only 29% of his carries at Alabama were into a stacked box. That is very, very low, even for a college offense where it's much easier to spread defenses out in college, but that is low even compared to other Power 5 offenses. Alabama basically knew that this is not a guy that you really want running between the tackles into a stacked box. It's just not his skill set. Lions running backs last year, that number was 70%. So 29% for Gibbs, 70%. So he's going to have a completely different experience. Maybe he can do it. I mean, I always like to say just because you didn't do it in college doesn't mean you can't do it in the pros, but that's a huge unknown. So I have some concerns there that he's going to see a really diminished, a much lower workload than some people are expecting in the run game specifically. Obviously, like I said, I still have exposure because the passing game gives him a huge ceiling, but we could see Montgomery really, really dominate the run game touches. And so I actually have more exposure to Montgomery at his ADP.
Yeah, I'm well over on Montgomery. He was one of my highest owned running backs. Recently, he's gone up a little bit too. But I would say I'm at least two to three times more Montgomery than Gibbs. I've actually taken them in the right case in the same lineup together. There was a period of about 3-4 weeks where right before camp where Gibbs was going in the 4th round. And I feel in the 4th round, especially in full PPR, he has a ceiling that can take you higher than the 4th round, right? I had the same concerns watching his tape. He also just didn't get a lot of red zone looks in college. So those are two major areas where you want your 3rd and 4th round running back to have. So I was buying the discount. Also a big fan of Monty. Bijan, not only is Algier still there, but Cordell Patterson is still there. I think Bijan is a good play, but when you have to take a guy in the first 8, 9, 10 picks of a draft, there's a real opportunity cost, especially on underdog, where wide receivers run out value runs out way earlier than running backs. He's been a harder click for me than I thought he would be. There's no discount either on Jaxon Smith-Njigba or Jordan Addison. I was hoping for that early camp, they're running behind these other guys, that you normally get. If anything, both of their ADPs have gone up a little bit since camp started. Both of them are guys that I fear to be as light on as I am, but I'm really light on both of them. Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to you. I have a little bit more of Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and I have hardly anything of Addison. I've sprinkled him in just because that should.
I'm afraid of getting Addison's disease.
Yeah, it's a good passing offense, so I don't want to have like zero exposure to someone like that in a good passing offense. But I'm not expecting him to pan out. I talked about the route adjusted numbers a lot last time we spoke, and for those who didn't hear us when we talked right after the draft, this is my favorite stat for rookie receivers when trying to project their jump to the NFL. Route adjusted numbers basically looks at the route on which you were targeted, and then what did you produce relative to the average catch rate and the average yards after catch on each play. So, for example, if you're targeted on a screen route, very, very high expected catch rate, like some close to 99%. And the yards after catch expectation is also very high. That's what the play is designed for. Compare that to like a curl route, for example. Still a relatively high catch rate, but the expected yak is very low because it's pretty common to end up with 0 yak on a play like that. So basically it looks at how you were using that offense and how you exceeded expectations. And this sort of levels the playing field a little bit for guys who are in different roles and sort of gives you like what's their true ability in those two areas. Because oftentimes we have receivers who are playing in one system in college and a completely different offense in the NFL. So it makes the projection a little bit easier. So with Jordan Addison, this is one of the reasons why I'm down on him. His catch rate last year was 3% above expected. That's not great. It's not bad. It's sort of a wash. But the concerning one is his yards after catch was only 5% above expected. That's very low for a first round. It was by far the worst among the first round wide receivers this year. And it's especially concerning because that was in Lincoln Riley's air raid offense, which is built around yak. Guys put up huge expected yak numbers in that offense. And Addison, slightly smaller receiver, a guy who should be producing in the offense that's tailor-made for it. And he wasn't a standout performer in that area. And so I have concerns as to how that's going to adjust to the NFL, where he's now not, first of all, he's not in an offense that's producing it at anywhere near like the Lincoln Riley air raid does. He's not the focal point of the passing game. I think it could be a tough adjustment.
He's not even the second option.
Yeah.
He's not even the second option. TJ Hawkinson is. You can make a case that Jaxon Smith-Njigba earns more targets than we I can make the case that Jaxon Smith-Njigba, he just is so open all the time. When it comes to Addison, I see a lot on Twitter, and I think it's very lazy. Well, the ghost of Adam Thielen got X number of targets and X number of receptions. First of all, that doesn't take into account that TJ Hawkinson wasn't there all year. And that once TJ Hawkinson got there, Thielen's role was definitely diminished. But, it doesn't eliminate the fact that, we saw a blurb that recently that KJ Osborne is the better blocker, and that running game needs help. I mean, I just don't know that Addison's an every down player like Adam Thielen was.
Yeah, we'll also look at the quarterback and how much experience he had with Thielen. He's less likely to quickly turn those targets to the rookie, especially when he has other receivers like Osborne that he has already built up some confidence in over the years. I certainly think Addison's
and Justin Jefferson's literally open every play.
Yeah, I mean, he's. Yeah. I just don't see him carving out a huge role. But like I said, you don't want to have zero exposure to him because it's a good passing offense. So, maybe he does exceed expectations. So I don't want to completely write him off, but it's certainly a low rostership percentage for me.
Quentin Johnston, as we discussed, is a guy who has just as much opportunity. I mean, as much skill as anyone in this class, but he also had more red flags than a lot of guys. The early news is that he hasn't beaten out Palmer and that Palmer is going to be involved. His ADP hasn't gone up, but what are you doing with Quentin Johnston based on that kind of news? My memory was you were bullish on Johnson last
time. No. What I'm doing is not drafting him. I might. Gotcha. I'd have to double check. It's possible I haven't drafted him at all just because of that ADP. There's so many better options. I think what really scares me is the floor for Johnston is 0. Like he might be a terrible fit as a rookie, and he'll have to just completely learn a brand new offense and a brand new role in the offense, because this is an offense it's going to ask a lot more of him than the TCU air raid offense. I mean, he played under 2 coaching staffs there, but both of them running versions of the air raid. And even though he's a bigger guy and certainly has the athleticism to develop into a really dangerous downfield weapon, he was used as a guy who was targeted on shorter routes and just asked to produce after the catch. And while that type of receiver can be valuable in fantasy, at best, he's the third option in the offense. And so if you're a guy who's just, catching screen passes and you're the third option in the offense, your fantasy ceiling is
and much. You can add Austin Eckler too.
Yeah.
You could argue as a receiver, you could argue at best he's a fourth option.
Yeah, and they're certainly going to sprinkle in targets to the tight end in Kellen Moore's offense. I mean, it's the ceiling for what he has proven to be capable of doing. If that's his continued role in the offense, it's very low. And he was not good as a downfield receiver. It's not just about the fact that he wasn't asked to do it. He performed poorly. I mentioned the adjusted numbers. His route adjusted catch rate was -4%. That's a huge red flag, not just for a rookie, but long term. If you're not doing it against college cornerbacks at his size and athleticism, that's a big red flag that maybe you can't do it. All the measurables are there, so like long term, it certainly wouldn't shock me if he develops in that area. But yeah, I don't have high expectations for him. So maybe I've drafted him once or twice just if he dropped a couple rounds in a random draft or two. But my exposure to him is as close to 0 it's going to get for any receiver coming off the board in that range.
Yeah, I've only pretty much taken him because I don't like Keenan Allen's ADP, and Mike Williams is tough to get with Justin Herbert. I've a couple times have taken Eckler in the first, Herbert, because I think overall Herbert is going to have a nice bounce back year. And then I will take Quentin Johnston, but I don't have much of him either. Zay Flowers is also moving up slightly, but has the best opportunity of the bunch to lead his wide receiver group in targets. He is another smart hedge if you want one of the top rookies, but I mean, I'm not quite as high on him. Lately, I was off Odell Beckham because of the fear of the knee, but Odell Beckham is out there every day practicing and goes after Zay Flowers and Bateman. Lately, I've been adding a lot of Odell Beckham. Your thoughts on Zay Flowers and that Baltimore receiving staff, Ryan?
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings because there's been really positive reviews about him, but like you mentioned, same thing with Beckham. So like, is that a wash? Do they kind of cancel each other out if they're both exceeding expectations, maybe it doesn't actually adjust. Maybe we shouldn't adjust our expectations from fantasy perspective. I wasn't real high on him initially because I thought the Ravens reached for him a little bit in the draft. I thought maybe he was a little overrated. His production at Boston College I felt like a little more volume based because he was like the only weapon in that offense essentially. I was also a little bit concerned by mediocre performance after the catch, 15% above expected yak for him, which a 5'9" receiver, you want to see like some really huge numbers, like Jackson Smith-Njigba's number, to throw out an example, much bigger, not nearly the dynamic athlete that you would think Flowers would be, but Jackson Smith-Njigba was at 34% above expected yak. And that's not even playing in an air raid offense. Like we've seen some Ohio State receivers have much, much lower numbers. Like Chris Olave was close to 0%. So, yeah.
What was Garrett Wilson?
Wilson's was relatively high also, not quite as high as Smith-Njigba's. Smith-Njigba's, I believe, was the highest of that trio. One of the reasons why I was so high on him in this draft is some of those peripheral numbers were as good or better than both of those guys that came out last year. But anyways, I'm sort of a little bit higher on Flowers because the camp production, it's all been really positive. But like you said, maybe Beckham, if he's also exceeding expectations, sort of cancels it out. So for me personally, I was drafting Flowers a little bit less earlier on, and so now I'm getting a little bit more aggressive to sprinkle in a little bit more because I was probably a little too low on him before, so I wanted to up my rostership. But depending on how you addressed him early, factor that into what you're doing now, I guess is what I would say.
Yep. One rookie whose ADP has dropped almost 2 full rounds is Anthony Richardson. Now, let's put that in context. In general, the quarterbacks have fallen, but I said from day one, and I think we said on the podcast last time, that we would both be kind of shocked if he didn't start from game one. And that prophecy seems to be coming true. One of the things that really kind of irks me is the thought, because I've been drafting a lot of Michael Pittman, and I know our own Rich Rebar is down on Pittman, but Pittman's a guy who was going in the 4th round last year with Matt Ryan having absolutely nothing left in the tank. The thing about Richardson is he makes bad throws, but he also makes throws as good as you could ever want. And that, that can lead to production. I see Richardson as an upgraded arm over what Pittman has had. Where are you at with Richardson, and is it keeping you from drafting Michael Pittman?
It's definitely not keeping me from drafting Pittman. I think there's still a pretty nice upside for Pittman where his ADP is. I have a relatively high percentage of Pittman because ultimately he's the clear-cut number one in that offense. Receivers on bad teams can put up pretty strong numbers. Like they're not going to throw for a ton of touchdowns, but when they do, it's going to be Pittman.
and the thing is, they say, well, he's not a deep threat. That's Pierce. Well, that's because Matt Ryan couldn't get the ball downfield. So Pittman had to live. But when he did go deep, he'd get open. It's not like he can't do it.
Yeah, Pierce is more of the pure straight line deep threat, but I don't think that's going to be a huge part of this offense. I wouldn't expect. Okay. The thing with Richardson is he buys you so much more time. Like with Matt Ryan, if you're throwing deep, it has to be Pierce on a go route, and he just runs past someone and you throw deep. With Richardson, they're going to be taking deep shots a lot that are like he scrambles, rolls out of the pocket like it's backyard football. There's going to be quite a few of those opportunities. And even just on designed plays that are designed to last longer. Like we're going to be 3.54 seconds after the snap and he's throwing deep. And with Matt Ryan, you can't do that. You can't expect him to hold the ball for that long. So I think Pittman's ability to get deep is going to be much higher with a quarterback like Richardson. So I don't have high expectations for him, but his ADP reflects lowered expectations. So I'm perfectly fine with drafting Pittman. With Richardson, I can't really add much to the conversation. He could win you leagues or he could get benched in week 4 because he's just as bad as he was at Florida. Like who knows? There's such an incredible range of outcomes for him. I mean, all the talk about like how bad he was in college last year, it's all true. He was awful at times. And so the possibility of him getting benched at some point in the season is very real, but the running ability, like, we're talking about fantasy football here. We gotta admit that from the fantasy perspective, his ceiling is as high as anybody.
Awesome. All right. Devon Achane or Devon Achane, I don't know if he's changed his name or not, saw a slight drop in June and early July due to concerns about Dalvin Cook joining the Dolphins. But we've seen in camp, when I watched his tape, I didn't see I saw a small guy, but I saw a running back who, when he hit the pile, moved the pile. I had far less concerns about his ability to run between the tackles than a lot of guys his size. What are your thoughts on Achane right now? And do you kind of agree with my take on, even though he's not big, he doesn't seem to run small?
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of would push back on that, but not to the point where I'm, necessarily avoiding him, because I think a player as explosive as him in an offense that certainly knows how to create opportunities for running backs, his ceiling is relatively high. A really concerning stat for me with him is that when he ran into a stacked box last year, he was stuffed at or behind the line of scrimmage on 22% of his carries. They ranked 53rd among Power 5 running backs. That's like bottom of the barrel.
Okay.
So your assertion that he plays bigger, there's definitely some highlights where he does, but I think looking at, I think this is maybe an example where sometimes the numbers tell us more than, when we're watching him, we're drawn to some of the highlights, and there certainly are plays where he does look bigger. I would certainly agree with you on that, but the numbers seem to indicate that at a pretty high percent of the time he's playing down to his size, and that's concerning to me. So especially in an offense that just sort of, they're capable of getting production out of anybody, and historically they've favored bigger guys, slightly bigger running backs. My feeling with him is that they may have simply drafted him because they wanted to add a new dimension to the offense, not necessarily because they wanted to change what they wanted from their lead back. And so I'm a little concerned that they're just going to sprinkle him in the passing game, give him some opportunities where you want to stretch to the outside and work him in. So I'm not real high on him, but I don't sort of like what I was saying with Addison. And in a good passing offense, you want exposure to anyone who's going to get the ball. This is sort of like the running game version of that. Like, I want a little bit of exposure to the McDaniel running backs, right?
Yep. I mean, the word on Dalton Kincaid has all been just super positive in camp. I've only really taken him with Josh Allen, because, I've heard too many times, well, he's not really a tight end. Well, he is a tight end, and they have other slot guys. And he gets open, but there were also some concerning things for me on his tape. Where are you at with Dalton Kincaid at his current ADP? Because you hate to miss out, especially on the FFPC where 1.5 points per catch. What are your thoughts on Dalton Kincaid? Because the news has been super positive.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have some exposure to him, but I'm not. I don't have high expectations. It really sort of just boils down to the fact that, like you said, they can say whatever they want to about what he is. He's a tight end. He's still going to line up as a tight end at a good portion of the time. And why do rookie tight ends struggle to get on the field? Blocking. I mean, that's the thing that always holds back rookie tight ends, always limits their snap count. And what was Dalton Kincaid's biggest weakness entering the draft? Blocking. Like that was the thing, was that he's a big slot. That's all he can really do. He doesn't really know how to block. But ultimately he is a tight end. And so the other part of that is, if they're saying he's a slot receiver, like if we're trying to hype him up as that and say it doesn't really matter that he can't block, well, this is an offense where everyone in Buffalo's been there a while. We know what their slot receiver looks like, and it's never looked anything like Dalton Kincaid, right? Like, it's been Cole Beasley. It's the smaller, quicker guys. So I think I know what they want in a slot receiver. And so that makes me think that that's a lot of talk, that he's a tight end. He's going to play tight end. He's going to line up in the slot sometimes, but he's a tight end. And so he's got some competition for those snaps, and we think he's going to struggle blocking because that was his big weakness. So, I mean, I'm with you. Putting him into some Josh Allen builds makes perfect sense because this is a really good offense. And even on a reduced snap count, could he get 8 to 10 touchdowns this year? That's certainly within the range of outcomes. So definitely get some exposure to him.
And he is cheap enough, especially on Underdog, where you take him in the 12th, 13th round as a second tight end, and you count on the rest of your team to get you to the playoffs, and you hope he has that 1 week during the playoffs where he gets 2 touchdowns and has that week that you have to have. Another tight end, very similar situation, is Sam Laporta of the Lions. We're hearing he's the starter as well. But again, the aptly nicknamed Block Right is there and is a very good blocker. Are you higher on Laporta than Kincaid, or is it a similar story for you?
I view them pretty similarly. I'm maybe ever so slightly higher on Laporta because I think that his blocking is, he's a better blocker. So the path to getting on the field is probably a little bit easier for him. I'm just a little more confident in him legitimately earning a starting role there and staying on the field. I also really liked his route adjusted yak was 21% above expected. That's awesome for a tight end. And Kincaid was not quite at that level. I forgot to write down his numbers. It was lower than that, and he's the one that gets hyped up as like the really good athlete. But Laporta, playing in a relic of an offense at Iowa, was still able to produce yak at a pretty good clip there. So I'm pretty excited about his ceiling, both short term and long term. So I have a little bit more Laporta than Kincaid, though I definitely view them similarly. Just because you got to factor in the floor is low for every rookie tight end every year. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough. A guy that I was a little late to the party on, I didn't even watch him the first time I did running back watching, but he's been a priority ad for me lately, is Tank Bigsby. His ADP is starting to move up, but I mean, now you're hearing that he's a better pass catcher than ETN, which I don't remember from his tape.
Yeah, I call BS on that.
Okay. But he certainly is a better goal line back. And if he mixes in, and then again, Travis Etienne missed his rookie year with a foot. If he misses, Tank Bigsby could be a lead winner. So your thoughts on Tank, and are you buying him even at his elevated ADP?
I'm not buying him. I haven't been buying him at all. Maybe he's the one rookie that's going to just really make me look bad this year because I'm just refusing to budge off my stance that he's not going to get it done. You're right. Like, the reviews have been really great about him, but I'm not willing to buy in because I feel like his running style is just so suited for training camp and creating undue hype. He's a bull in a china shop. Like, he is just, give me the ball, go, go, go. I don't care where I'm supposed to go. I'm just going to run somebody over. And that is just so suited for training camp and just to get, fans and beat writers on the sidelines who don't really know what's supposed to happen and don't really have a good angle to see what's happening anyway. It's just so suited for getting people excited. And he is really fun. I mean, his highlights at Auburn were awesome, especially his first 2 years there. The one stat for him that just from this past season that really scares me is that when he was contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage, 53% of his carries were stuffed for 0 or negative yards. That's the same as Deuce Vaughn, and he is a polar opposite physically from Deuce Vaughn. You expect that from Deuce Vaughn, right? Tiny running back, you need to create space for him. Totally expected for him. The Cowboys drafted Deuce Vaughn knowing that was never going to be his strength. But Bigsby, he's supposed to run people over. Like, he's supposed to create something even when things get blown up, and he didn't do it at a really concerning rate. And he just has no, I just don't think he has any vision. He wants to take the ball and run people over. And, it was a bad situation at Auburn last year. Really the past 2 years was a bad situation. So maybe I'm really off base. Maybe he's going to flourish in a much more stable environment in Jacksonville, working with Doug Peterson. Maybe he's going to prove me wrong, but I'm not buying him at all.
Yeah. Ernest Johnson is there also, and he flashed. So I don't have any of him. Next guy up is Rashee Wright. I mean, I wanted to like Rashee Wright's tape a lot. And, we've seen this, last year with Skyy Moore, that the Chiefs take a guy probably a little earlier than they should. And, there's a lot of hype about him, but Justin Ross is there. Richie James is there. He's not running with the starters. I think he's another one of these guys you've got to take a few shares of, but he's a tough click for me. Do you like him more than I do?
No, completely on the same page as you there. I mean, I think the comparison to Skyy Moore is really necessary here because Skyy Moore came in, I think, as a much more polished receiver. And the Chiefs last year needed receivers. They would have been totally justified to get him more incorporated in the offense, but they just didn't feel comfortable with it for whatever reason. Rice comes in a much less polished receiver. He's got a really sloppy game, and he got by with it in college, playing against lesser competition in the American Conference. But he's got inconsistent hands. His routes are pretty sloppy, and so knowing that about him, that he's just sort of got by on really great athleticism, I question how quickly he's going to get on the same page as Mahomes. So, I mean, it's another example of like great offense. So you want some exposure, but I think the floor is very low.
Well, since we're talking about Skyy Moore, he's one of my top 2 or 3 wide receiver owned. And I have heavy bags back 3-4 rounds ago because when I saw Skyy Moore's tape, I saw someone who was raw from a small school, and I saw all the hype. He was going in the 8th, 9th round last year, and I said, no, I'm just not drafting this guy. If he beats me, he beats me. But I just don't see it. Now, Juju's gone. They have there was another receiver who's gone. And we've been hearing Skyy Moore is, he seems pretty. What they got him experience at all 3 roles last year. I see him as the best fit for the Juju role, which was over 100 targets, 78 catches, and I think he has more juice than Juju. I loved him this year as a post-type sleeper. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I expect a lot more from him last year. I wasn't totally on the bandwagon. I mean, I definitely agree with you. The early hype on him was way too high. But I think he was relatively polished for a rookie. And so I was surprised that he didn't get as many opportunities as he did. And so now that he has had a full offseason to work with Patrick Mahomes, he went through the whole season. He's got this whole offseason. I think he's going to I just think they're going to have more confidence in him. So I would definitely expect nice growth from him this year and a really high ceiling, obviously, if he emerges as a trusted option.
Yeah. And look, Travis Kelce avoided the age bugaboo last year, but now he's entering his age 34 season. If he goes down, Noah Gray will get some catches. Jody Fortson will get some catches. But to me, Skyy Moore would be the next, I mean, Tony, obviously, if like everything goes right, Tony could be that guy. But I'm much, much more confident in Skyy Moore's ability to take advantage of, Travis Kelce not being Travis Kelce. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have extremely low exposure to Tony. He's just Skyy Moore is the reliable, even though we haven't seen a ton of him. I think having watched him coming out and reading quotes from coaches and whatnot, I think that there's a very high probability that he has fit in well in Kansas City and that he is, over the course of the past year, has earned a lot of trust from Mahomes and from his coaching staff. So projecting him to see increased opportunities if other players get injured or underperforming, I think is a relatively safe bet to make with him.
Kendre Miller saw a drop in ADP in July, but with Alvin Kamara getting only a 3-game suspension, one might think he would have a tough road to relevance, but he has 3 games to show he belongs. I was not in love with Kendre's tape as much as other people. He reminded me of a slightly better Royce Freeman in the sense that, I felt like Royce Freeman was a guy who was okay at everything but great at nothing. And I find that those guys don't really do much in the next level. Your thoughts on Kendre Miller, and am I off base, do you think?
I don't think that you're off base in terms of projecting his fantasy value. I'm probably a little higher on him overall as a prospect than what you're describing.
I'm higher than Royce Freeman.
But I think, to me, Royce Freeman is a guy who was just drafted 10 to 15 years too late, and he would have been a great running back in the NFL in 1998, but he just didn't have the juice to really cut it in this era. And I think Miller's a better athlete than that. And so I do think that if he were to get opportunities.
I do agree with that. I've come around on his athleticism.
Yeah, I think if he gets opportunities, he'll do well. And he's got a nice balanced skill set where he is athletic enough to bounce runs to the outside, but he's big enough to handle a between the tackles workload. So from an overall perspective, I would say I'm reasonably high on him. I'm just skeptical that he's going to get opportunities. So he's sort of the type of guy that I have sprinkled in just because it's possible that injuries and whatnot happen there. And, he works his way up to a good workload in what should be an okay offense. But, I think we should also be concerned with the fact that the Saints were interested in Kareem Hunt. So that says that they're not necessarily satisfied with what I thought looked like a pretty nice backfield in terms of depth. So maybe that, sort of tips their hand a little bit as far as what our expectations should be, what their expectations are with Miller.
I kind of looked at the Hunt thing as, well, let's get, a lot of times when these guys are just sitting around, teams start adding them real cheap as depth, right? And we think because of X, Y, or Z that they, because of their name, that these teams think of them more. But how many times have we seen these vets sign and then just languish, right, on the bench and not get an opportunity? I'm not as off of Miller as all that, especially with Kamara missing 3 games, because it could just be, some depth until Kamara comes back. But, so if he goes down in value, I have very little of him this year because I don't like 3-way backfields too much, especially on not great offenses. And there were other running backs in that area that I did like more. Speaking of which, my love for Tyjae Spears is somewhat legendary by this point, but I haven't heard the hype that I would like. He's super cheap still. Am I crazy on, but I just love Tyjae Spears.
Yeah, I know you're really high on him. And I think last time we talked, I was very, very low on him, but I've changed a little bit because of what's happened with Hassan Haskins. Really, the main reason why I was low on him was that Haskins, even before he landed in Tennessee, I wrote in my scouting report on him that if you were looking for a relatively cheap prospect and you wanted to run a Tennessee-like offense with a Derrick Henry-like running back, Hassan Haskins is tailor-made for that. And then, of course, he lands in Tennessee, which made me think that they were saying the same things, and he's the perfect backup for Henry. So my thinking at the time was Spears is has become like the change of pace guy there, and that they want Henry. Haskins is the backup that would fill in if Henry were to go down, and then Spears is, he's going to fill his own unique role. But, with the off the field stuff that's going on with Haskins, I think his role in Tennessee is a big question mark right now, and which probably makes Spears the pretty obvious backup now. So I'm much more excited about him because given Henry's age, even though, I wouldn't be shocked if he comes out and has 275 carries again, but we've got the odds of that happening are obviously much lower given his age. So I think it's absolutely
And he's
worth
broken
buying.
down each of the last 2 years a little bit.
Yeah, and their offensive line looks like it's going to be abysmal, which is just going to make him have to work harder for that yardage.
A transitional offensive line. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the one thing I loved about Spears is you would think a guy his size wouldn't be a red zone guy. And I know the competition wasn't great, but he's got this move where he gives you the shoulder and then he lets the shoulder go, and he's so quick that he just walks into the end zone, right? I mean, and you see that move that he does, and it's one of the more subtle running back moves that I've ever seen, right? A lot of times, running back fakes, but he does, you know what I'm talking about? He does like this little thing with his shoulder, and it gets the linebackers to kind of slow, like, they are expecting him to turn it up, and then he cuts it back outside. That's the thing about Spears that just really excites me, is he's the type of guy who could get lost in a phone booth.
Yeah, he's very quick at the line of scrimmage, and I think it allows him to play a little bit bigger than he is between the tackles. I completely agree with what you're saying there.
All right, cool. The next guy is another guy that I like, and his buying window, because of the injury to Mr. Patrick, is closing. But Marvin Mims kind of seems like the perfect guy for Russell Wilson. And if you're not as high on Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton as some people, Marvin Mims is a guy who he's a big play guy.
Yeah, I really like Mims. His route adjusted yak was 26% above expected last year. And that's an offense that's designed to produce yak, but it was also a little bit of a dysfunctional offense at times last year. And he continued to produce through it. So, yeah, I'm really high on him. I think he was potentially one of the steals of the draft. Obviously, it is sort of crowded.
I agree.
Like it's a crowded depth chart there, but like you said, he does seem to be really well suited for what Wilson does best, and what they should hopefully be designing that offense around is giving him opportunities to produce after the catch. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him, as the season goes on, start to build more trust with Wilson and see his opportunities increase.
Yeah, I've had a decent amount of Mims. In fact, I want to look it up because I want to make myself feel good. I've got 12% in FFPC, but in the later best ball, because I got on them a little late, 18% in later best ball. And let's look at, I want to see where I'm at on underdog, 14.4%, which is a real nice amount for me. So yeah, I'm glad that you like him. Another guy that my memory was I liked him a lot more than you, but the camp news has been good. His buying discount is gone, but Jalin Hyatt is a guy that to me is he's a game breaker. Is my memory right? You weren't on him as much as I was?
Yeah, I'm still not really interested in him. I mean, because he's so explosive and no one really stands out as a go-to guy in that offense, you got to have some exposure to him. Maybe he breaks out right away, but there's just a lot of concerning stuff with him coming from that the Art Briles offense that they run at Tennessee, the same one that Corey Coleman, is that the guy the Browns drafted out of Baylor in the first round? That offense has never produced anybody, and they especially struggle as rookies. The offense is so simplistic. It's so bare bones backyard football that both receivers and quarterbacks have an adjustment period when they come into the league. And no one has ever really made it out of that and succeeded. I'm not willing to write off anybody coming from that offense long term, because I think the fact that no one has succeeded long term is kind of a fluke. It's not like we have a huge sample size of receivers entering the league. But in the short term, I think that is a very real trend. You have to learn an NFL playbook. And what they were working with was nothing close to it. So given how there's no number one there, which gives them a path to being number one, but there's also like there's no clear number 2 or number 3 or like there's 6.
Well, there's like 80 different slot guys.
So he could be number 1, but he could be number 8.
The one blurb that I really liked in the last week that I heard about him was, in mini camp, the comment was very similar to what you just said, that he was behind the playbook. And I saw something in one of the blurbs that he really took the time between mini camp and regular camp he really buckled down, right? Like just really spent a lot of time in his playbook. So that was, that gave me a little reason to hope. Lastly, as far as receivers go, I find that there's some really interesting rookies late. And I've been adding these 4 guys: Michael Wilson, Puka Nacua, Josh Downs, and Tank Dell. I think all of them have juice. And, do they have questions? Absolutely. They're going in the last round of drafts. But Wilson especially seems to be doing really well at camp. Your thoughts on these 4?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about guys going the last round, so I have no issue with sprinkling those guys in there because everyone you're getting there has
because at least rookies you have the what if, right? A lot of the other guys, we know what they are.
Yeah,
I know what Devontae Parker is.
Yeah, right? Essentially what you're saying is like the ceiling is higher for those guys, even if the probability of hitting like a 0 floor is a little bit higher, and that's a totally justified risk to take. I think Wilson is the one guy that I don't think I have any of him. I have seen the headlines, and so maybe I should.
I didn't either until recently, and then I've been adding them.
Yeah, maybe I should sprinkle in a little bit.
It's a steady drumbeat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's opportunity. If the offense if it isn't completely terrible, there's a path to him being usable.
And we've seen Hollywood get hurt every year. Mm-hmm. I probably should have more of what's that other receiver who played really well when Hollywood was out?
Drawing a blank, but while you take a second to look that up, just another stat to drop on Michael Wilson. What concerns me is his route adjusted catch rate last year was only 0.3% above expected. So basically average. You would expect more from a guy if he's going to be an NFL starter, you would expect more. And then it was 6% below expected on the most common NFL routes. And as a 6'2" receiver who's not really an explosive playmaker, he's probably going to be running those most common routes at an even higher rate because he's not really a guy that's going to stretch the field. And yeah, Stanford was bad, but they did have an NFL quarterback. I mean, the Eagles drafted his quarterback, Tanner McKee. So he was working with a very capable quarterback there and not really producing that much. So I have some doubts.
With a good coach too.
Yeah. And so I have doubts about him. But yeah, to take a flyer on a guy based on camp rumors in the last round, sure, like that's justified.
Fine. And rookie tight ends are, as we've discussed, tough. But Mayer in the last round, Musgrove in the last round, I mean, it's hard to argue with those 2 guys that late. They both have opportunity in front of them. A big part of why these guys don't do much as rookies is because tight ends have to block, and a lot of times it takes time for them to learn that. Mayer was a pretty complete prospect. I questioned his upside as a receiver, but I don't think you're going to need to keep him off the field. Musgrove is more of a Laporta type, but I mean the camp news on him is very positive.
Yeah, given their ADP, I like both of them a lot. I have a pretty decent exposure to both of them. I think even the floor, I'm not too scared of with them. They're going to get on the field. They're going to, I guess Musgrave has a lower floor just because that offense might be really bad. And I have a little bit more faith that there's that Mayer is entering into at least a close to average offense. Whereas obviously in Green Bay, who knows, like so much rests on Love and it could go sideways. And also he's competing with Tucker Tucker Kraft, their third-round rookie tight end, who I was pretty high on as well. Viewed them as pretty similar.
It's funny because everyone talks about Hurst and Andrews and how the later guys. So a lot of smart people were taking Kraft, not Musgrove, and this time it looks like, so at least so far, it's the opposite. That's going to do it for us. I think we covered all the rookies. Ryan, love your stuff. What are you working on, and what are you going to be doing in season?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Over the next couple of weeks leading up to the season, we're rolling out a series of player props articles, going position by position. Just today, we dropped 3 overs that I like, 3 unders that I like, and we'll be doing a podcast on that tomorrow, actually, to kind of talk about those a little bit more in depth. They'll be continuing position by position, and during the season, similar stuff, a lot of player prop stuff from me on a weekly basis during the season, plus a little bit of college football. So if you're into betting on college football, I do like a game of the week type article on 2 or 3 games that I really like. So check that out. Also, if you're into college football betting,
I absolutely will, because I'm not much of a bettor, which is funny since I work for Sharp. But you really impress me with your knowledge, and then my eyes kind of tend to agree with the things that you say. It's I always like to have that testimony of 2. You hear it from someone you respect, and then you see it with your own eyes. That gives you the comfort level to do it. Thank you very much again. Next week, Justin Herzig returns. We'll talk some weekly winners with him. And that's going to do it for this episode. I will see you later.